Well, hello there, gracious gang. This is the Gracious Guest Podcast, and welcome to you all. If this is your first time listening to this particular show, I'll give you a little, what's the word I'm looking for? Synopsis, I guess? Yeah, I'll give you a little synopsis, little description, little explanation for your sake, for your benefit, about what this show is all about in just a second. But first of all, I've been rude here, okay? And for a guy who runs a podcast and even a sort of broader reaching kind of endeavor that includes blog posts and presentations and all sorts of stuff called The Gracious Guest, it seems kind of strange that I have not yet introduced myself. So let me do this. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Mike. Hi. Mike Creevy. Mike Creevy is my name, and I am in the Harrisburg area of Pennsylvania. I'm a dude. I have brown hair and brown eyes. Hazel eyes, technically. I'm like 5'8" on a good day. What else? I like beaches. I do like, in fact, long walks on them, although I must say if it's really hot, I don't as much. Because I also like comfort. And sometimes that gets me into trouble. So, especially when food is involved. But anyways, this show, all the nonsense aside here, is called The Gracious Guest, because it is the podcast component of a lot of other work that I do that really focuses on wonder, on what in Greek, if you're a fan of the Bible, and if you're not, you should be, believe me. It's thaumazo. It's a Greek word that means marvel or wonder. And, you know, it's interesting in this time with all these Marvel movies, right? The Marvel Cinematic Universe is just completely dominating our whole cinema experience these days, you know, things that have Marvel in their title makes you kind of sometimes wonder what Marvel even means, I mean, maybe you should if you haven't. I think sometimes actually it can be kind of mundane, or we get used to a particular kind of slogan or title or you know, bumper sticker, and then sometimes we don't think about what the deeper meaning might be, or we don't actually stop and think at all about it. And I'm not saying like we have to all be necessarily highfalutin philosophers and stuff, and I don't consider myself one by any stretch of the imagination. I just think, you know, in living day to day and seeing kind of the pace of the world and the news cycle and just a lot of the things that kind of bog us down, a lot of the questions that arise in human life, that we all inevitably run into, no matter how much we want to try to run away from them. I think really at the core of all of it, it's a worthwhile thing to maybe focus a little bit more on the wonderful, on the things that are truly full of wonder. What is wonder? What does it mean to kind of step back a little bit and look up? I think actually it was Aristotle or Plato or one of those dudes, I'll have to look this up later, this is just coming to mind, you know, who kind of speculated a little bit that what really set us apart was this ability to wonder. And Dante, even I think Dante, in his one of his descriptions in his writings, I think it's in the Inferno, can't remember, or in the Divine Comedy, that one of the characteristics of the people that he sees in this sort of very somewhat embellished maybe, but very descriptive, imaginative concept of people in hell, people in whatever you want to call it, you know, some kind of eternal damnation, people in a eternal situation after death where they've kind of lost their humanity. They're walking around hunched over and they can't stand up. And I was just listening to someone brought this up on a recent episode of the Catholic Man Show, which is a pretty awesome podcast. I've interviewed those guys over there, Adam and David, in the past. They were very gracious with me with their time and their guest, and I can't remember which show it was recently, so you'll have to just go back and listen to them all because it's a great show. He brought this up, this connection with Dante, and it was in the broader conversation about a lot of our technology these days, which isn't bad or anything. It's great, you know, in and of itself. It's a tool, it can be used for good or bad. And this idea of us kind of hunched over our phones and stuff, and I thought, holy smokes, that's really like, that's what Dante was maybe talking about. So anyways, that's kind of what this show is about. And, you know, basically the theme or the overall kind of purpose of it is to stop for a few minutes, maybe like on your commute. Sometimes the show's 10 minutes long, sometimes it's upwards of 30, but usually it's between 10 and 20. And those who listen to the show even once are called the Gracious Gang. You're part of the Gracious Gang, and I very much appreciate you checking out this show and sharing it with your friends and subscribing to get podcasts in the future. So thank you very much for doing that. Today, with this greater theme of wonder in mind, for those of you who have not listened to the show before, another thing that's important to know is that the different topics that come up on any given show could be everything from movies to books to, just observations about life. So it's very wide-ranging, and that's why today's topic of space might seem strange to you. But believe me, I think it'll all make sense at the end here. And I don't have a whole lot to share. I just want to kind of share from the heart, from my soul, that ever since I was a kid, as long as I can remember, the two things, in terms of, I guess, maybe natural environments or phenomena, I don't really know what you want to call it, the two, natural sort of things that have always just completely captivated my attention every single time without fail. Every time I think about them, every time I observe them, I am always catapulted into just an absolute sense of wonder and awe, and just my mind goes a million miles a minute. Or the other extreme, it'll just go very slowly, just very meditatively. It's an experience that just captivates all of me, all of my attention. It's impossible for me to really be as distracted as I am so often in other cases. Those two things are the sea, which I've done a show about before, so go back and check that out. A little back the feed, I think it was last summer. So the sea or the ocean, not so much like at a lake, even a really big lake. This is really a phenomenon that I experience when I'm at, the sea. Okay, SEAC. That's one of them, probably my favorite. And the other one is space. Every time I'm in space. Okay, that was lame. Although I guess in a way we are all in space, kind of, in that we're on Earth flying through space. But I mean, like looking up at a absolutely incredibly glorious starlit night. I've never been anywhere on this planet where my mind was more blown by looking up at the sky than I was in Arizona. So if you ever get the chance to go to Arizona, especially if you're driving through the desert or something in the middle of the night, don't go wandering away from your car because a coyote might get you or something, or a javelina, one of those wild pigs, which is pretty dangerous. But nevertheless, because there's just, for a few reasons, I think, where I was at in Arizona, especially, that this was such an incredible experience. For one thing, obviously you're out kind of in the middle of nowhere, and there's not a whole lot of light. So I was sort of in southern Arizona, about an hour south of Tucson, and there's pretty much no settlements in between, Tucson and Sierra Vista, where I was headed for my Army training. And the sky, there's no way to describe it. I mean, when there's no ambient light, no sort of like light pollution kind of detracting from, the incredible brightness of the stars, that's one thing. But also you're so high up there. And a lot of people don't remember that, or they're not aware of that in that particular part of Arizona, you're at 5,000 feet. You think of the desert and all that, and it is, but it's like a high desert. So, I don't know if that extra little mile further up really seems to help with that experience, but it seemed to in my experience. And so every time, since I was a kid, like I said, there's just something about going outside. Sometimes I'd lay on top of my car, or just drive somewhere, and specifically drive somewhere late at night to like park in by a field or somewhere out in the countryside where I can really get that experience. And I just stare, and it's incredible to me. For a lot of reasons. I mean, those stars, you're looking back in time every time you look up into the night sky. Those stars, it's taking sometimes millions of years for that light to reach you. So the way you're looking at that star right now is not the way it looks right now. It's the way it looked thousands or millions of years ago. That's incredible to imagine. If you watch a movie like Interstellar, where they dabble with some of the things like gravitation's effect, gravity's effect on time itself, on light, on the speed of light, that time, as we know it, time is a creature. It's not an absolute. There was a time, if you want to use that word, where time didn't exist, and it's so I'm not an astrophysicist by any stretch of the imagination, but I am so fascinated by all of that. And, space, time, and the vast expanses and distances in space, all the phenomena that we can't explain, the possibility of life on other planets, and all this stuff. I love that stuff, and it fascinates me. So I really, really enjoy thinking about that. That being said, I wouldn't say I'm the hugest sort of sci-fi fan. I think it kind of depends for me, because it's not just, when there's a movie where there's just science fiction for science fiction's sake, where it's like the story is just the, apparatus, or the very bare minimum sort of skeleton around which is built an excuse to use all these fancy scientific terms. The science might be really, really good, and the person writing it might be really, really sincere and genuine, but if it's a lousy story, I just, So, like, when I read science fiction, or I watch science fiction, whatever it is, story's really important, though, because there has to be a purpose to it. And with all that in mind, this, I think part of the reason is the more I think about it, the more I kind of reflect and contemplate, the more I read, the more I watch, I'm really struck by this notion that I titled the show today, that space isn't really space. Like, think of that word. Like, that's a word we've started using in the last few hundred years, which, for those of us in kind of the West, is a long time, but in the grand scheme of human existence, it's not. And we kind of sometimes have this cultural arrogance, I'm afraid, where, just because we're here and now, we're the smartest to have ever lived. That's really stupid to think that, and dangerous even sometimes. So I think there's something to be said for, we use the word space, and just the usage of that word, I think, says a lot about sometimes how we think about everything else in the universe. Space indicates nothingness, right? Like, space is what you have when you have an empty closet, right? This house has lots of space. What does that mean? Well, it's room, nothingness into which I can potentially put stuff. We're not putting new stuff into space. It's kind of there, right? There's planets and, galaxies and stars and, asteroids and all these things. Like, those are, in our minds, sometimes it's like that's the stuff, and then space is where all of that kind of is. But because it's so expansive and so incredible, and the distances we can't even really conceive of between asteroid A and planet B, we tend to focus on the emptiness. And sometimes I think that has more to do with us than it has to do with out there, and the reality of what's out there, that we feel empty, we feel like there's something missing, and we don't really know what to do with that or how to fill that in our own lives. And so sometimes we project that into, quote, space. But I want to suggest to you, and I'm going to use the words of C.S. Lewis here to really drive this home. By the way, this is from his Space Trilogy, the first book of Lewis's Space Trilogy back in the 1930s, Out of the Silent Planet, where the main character, spoiler alert, Ransom, his name is Ransom, he's a philologist, and he gets kidnapped and basically taken on this space journey. And that's all I'll say about it. If you want to hear reviews of this book, which I can't recommend it enough, this whole series, for a lot of reasons, social and, if you have a sci-fi interest, whatever, religious interest, all of these things are taken up in these stories in a really incredible way. In fact, I love the Space Trilogy more than the Narnia series. For those of you who are Narnia fans, I am too, but I think this is Lewis's masterpiece, quite frankly, but a lot of people don't know about it. So anyways, Out of the Silent Planet, when Ransom is in the midst of being taken out into this journey, and he's first coming to grips with realizing where he's at, he has this little reflection, so it's kind of early on, and it's not a spoiler alert or anything for you. If you want to, by the way, like I started to say, if you want to hear my some reviews of these stories themselves, go back and check that out. I have a couple episodes a while back for my review of Lewis's Space Trilogy, so you can go check that out. Okay, so here we go. This is page 28 in my version of this. Ransom, as time wore on, became aware of another and more spiritual cause for his progressive lightening and exaltation of heart. A nightmare, long engendered in the modern mind by the mythology that follows in the wake of science, was falling off him. He had read of space, air quotes. He had read of space. At the back of his thinking for years had lurked the dismal fancy of the black, cold vacuity, the utter deadness which was supposed to separate the world. Which was supposed to separate the worlds. He had not known how much it affected him till now. Now that the very name space seemed a blasphemous libel for this empyrean ocean of radiance in which they swam. He could not call it dead. He felt life pouring into him from every moment. How indeed should it be otherwise, since out of this ocean the worlds and all of their life had come? He had thought of it barren. He saw now that it was the womb of worlds, whose blazing and innumerable offspring looked down nightly even upon the earth with so many eyes, and here with how many more? No, space was the wrong name. Older thinkers had been wiser when they named it simply the heavens. The heavens which declared the glory, the happy climes that lie where day never shuts its eye, up in the broad fields of the sky. He quoted Milton's words to himself lovingly at this time and often. So I just really love that, and that's kind of at the core of what I just wanted to share today, this idea of something, just a challenge maybe for us, like, when you look up at night, and do this, by the way, first of all, if you don't do this, give it a shot. I don't know where you live, listening to this, you might be in a city, you might be someplace where it's really hard to see the night sky in any, sort of significant way at night. Also it's been really cloudy and rainy lately, so that's kind of put a damper on things. But next chance you get to maybe get out in the countryside somewhere, or go somewhere where it's not as bright, and get out there late at night, take time to do it. And for like a good half hour, maybe even an hour, like give yourself the time, I recommend, to look up at the night sky, look into the heavens, and see what happens. I really mean it. I mean, you might be surprised. You try this a couple times, even if it doesn't happen on the first try. Just to deliberately spend some time opening up to what might inspire you, thinking about that distance, thinking about our seeming insignificance at first. But what's funny is, you go through a couple waves if you do this right. You will be hit sometimes by the sheer magnitude of how big it all is and how tiny you are. Now, not to make yourself seem less or insignificant, because I think that's a mistake a lot of people make. We can maybe talk about that some other time. But here's the key. It is something that in one sense can help maybe your problems seem a little bit less significant, right? Like maybe not you. Don't let yourself feel insignificant. Don't believe that. But maybe your problems aren't that bad. This great huge expanse of space or the heavens. You're here for a reason. You could be somewhere else, but you're here. And maybe that problem you're running into, maybe that relationship issue, maybe that financial issue, maybe that test you have coming up, whatever it is. Hey, look, life goes on. I mean, it might be really, really hard right now, sincerely. And that happens to all of us. And, you're in my thoughts and prayers, whoever you are. That whatever you're going through is, it might be really awful, truly, but it'll pass, right? Everything passes. Everything, has a beginning and an end, in this life. And sometimes just kind of looking up and reflecting on that, you can kind of let yourself wonder. You can kind of open up to maybe a little broader perspective, and maybe have a better chance of maybe remembering the good times too, remembering the hope that we should have, for a better day than the one we maybe had today. There's another day coming. So, just some thoughts. Space. It isn't really space. It's so much more than that. And go check it out. All right? Well, I mean, at least looking at it. If you can get into space, too, that's pretty cool. I've never had anyone send me a message from space. If you're an astronaut who has somehow stumbled across the Gracious Guest Show, can you please send me an email from space? That'd be like the coolest thing ever. Maybe we can make that happen. Maybe somebody who can actually hook that up. I do realize that all of our communications bounce up into space and off satellites and stuff, but that's like not very personal. So anyways, that would be a cool thing that would make me really happy. If there's a way we can pull that off, that'd be awesome. So you're listening to The Gracious Guest Show. This is Mike Creevy. Thanks so much for tuning in. Remember, subscribe to the podcast, share it with your friends. Again, no doubt there's things I talk about that might be totally boring, not interesting to you. That's fine. There's all sorts of different things coming up from time to time on this show. And next episode is going to be special. It's episode 50. And I want to spend a little time just sharing a little bit about the like where this show came from and just some of the things I've learned, I think, from doing this and some other radio endeavors that I've been involved with. So I'd love to share that with you, and that will be episode 50. So thanks so much for tuning into The Gracious Guest Show, and until next time, don't forget to wonder. Take care.